Let's open in a word of prayer. Let me just get one of my slides here finished up that I just remembered I wanted to do. Give me 1 second. Okay, now we'll start. Let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. We pray that you'll help us to navigate through some difficult topics today and understand how these relate to the conditions of the world that are described by the prophets that would exist near and at the time of the Lord's return. I pray you'll give us understanding. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, that starts off a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit today. Sort of the theme that I hope you'll see as we go through these things is when foundations fail. There's a story in the I'm getting a lot of feedback, New Testament, about a tower that fell, and they came to the Lord and asked them about that. And it's kind of interesting that story's, it's one of the stories in the New Testament. Because what Jesus did a lot of times what they did was they brought current events that were happening in Israel at the time to Jesus and asked him his opinion about these. One was the tower that fell. What caused that? Was it because of somebody's sin and that sort of thing? They also came to him one time and asked him questions about Herod and his relationship, not Herod, but the son of Herod, who was the ruler, and his relationship with, I think it was his brother's wife. And so Jesus dealt with current events. I guess that's my point that I'm trying to say. Here's some places that we're at. You might have seen the announcement first hour, if you were here at church, about we're looking at, I think, going to be working with Subsplash to try to move things to our own server, our own app, because we just think that the powers that be are not too happy with the way things are going or with what we might talk about. And that would open us up, I think, because there are some subjects, I'll be honest with you, that I avoid somewhat just because we have the church messages that we want to make sure that we get out to a large audience, and we don't want to necessarily affect that by what we talk about in the prophecy update. And there's plenty of people out there that are talking about it where you can find the information, but there are people watching, and I'll give you a couple examples of that today. I also did a sort of a catching up with Jacob talk with Jacob the other day that went, you might find this hard to believe, went a little over an hour, where we talked about some of the current events. So you might look for that. You can find that at Monray TV YouTube channel or RTN TV, and I think you can also find it on the DeVore Truth. The DeVore Church out in California put it up on their YouTube channel as well. And so I'm going to be doing a little bit more of that on a regular basis. I think next week Marco Quintana, the pastor at DeVore, will, I don't know if he'll interview me. He and I are going to have a conversation on Friday. So I'll be doing that on a little bit more regular basis right now. And you can continue to look for these different platforms that we're on. I will confess to you, I think Rumble was a little bit difficult to navigate. People tell me to move to Telegram or Gab or something else, but I find the interfaces to not be well designed yet. I just haven't been able to get on board with them, but I'm working on it. Convergence of events. We talk about the convergence of events, the things that are happening that indicate that the time of the Lord's return is near. Now, I'm going to put up a email. Look, I don't have a lot of talking about this today, but I think that it's pretty clear that there are a lot of supply chain problems. Although, as I've been in and out of a bunch of different stores this week, I haven't noticed too much of a problem except one big chain. I noticed that a lot of their dairy section at a big store was pretty empty. Now, I don't know if the dairy section in that store was under repair or not, but there are some places where I see empty shelves in grocery stores. But for the most part around here, I don't think we've had it hit yet. But there are a lot of things going on that indicate that supply chain problems and shortages may be an issue this fall. So I think it would behoove you to do some preparation. I don't think you have to go crazy on it. And if you email woodsgirl@protonmail.com, that person, I'm not going to identify that person, will provide you with a prep list that she's prepared that I think is pretty good. Some things that you need to consider as you store up a little bit of food and water and that sort of thing. So if you want that list, just send it to woodsgirl@protonmail.com and you will receive a prep list. I want us to clarify some things that I said last Sunday in my sermon. I talked about Abraham. Before Abraham was, I am in John chapter 8. But when Jesus encountered the Jewish leaders at that time, they brought up the subject of Abraham. Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. And they're like, well, what do you mean, Abraham, he's died, he's dead, he's long gone. And you need to understand, I don't think I made this point clear enough, but Abraham was a really big deal to these Jewish leaders. They had access at that time to a number of very rich, definable, accessible archaeological sites that were tied to Abraham, and they would have known where they were. For example, this is Bethel, the Bethel that is between the town of Bethel and Ai. And you can go there today. We've been there, Pam and I were there. And it's right in the middle of a neighborhood near Highway 60, the main highway that goes up through the Highway of the Patriarchs, I think they call it. It goes from Hebron to Jerusalem up to around Nablus. And you can get off and you can walk and you can climb around there. And one of the things that they do when they look at these archaeological sites is they see layer after layer after layer after layer built at a place, and it's usually a church, a temple, some kind of worship associated with it, and they know that that's a long-established holy site. And so what they did here was they go and they look and they see Genesis chapter 12, 13, where Abraham went there and built an altar. They see, and it identifies it between Bethel and Ai. And then there's also a passage in Genesis chapter 28 where Jacob went there. And we know the story of Jacob where he had that dream of the ladder to heaven. I have no doubt in my mind that this is where that occurred, because it was something that was recognized. Herod himself, while Herod was not religious, Herod is a good type of the Antichrist because he did things to appeal to everybody. For example, he did things to appeal to the Romans. He built a couple temples, I think 3 temples to Augustus. One of them was at Samaria, and you can go there today and walk around the ruins of the temple that Herod built to Augustus. I've done it myself. The interesting thing is, though, when other people came on the scene later, that the failure of people to worship what that temple represented led to their execution. It's a picture of what will happen in the future with this coming world ruler, the Antichrist. So you have this site at Bethel down south of Hebron. You can see this is an aerial shot looking down on Monray and Hebron. And the outline, you can see the tall building there. That's along the left side of the picture, that's an Arab school. Because when we were there, we were sort of joking around with I was joking around with some of the students there about who was the best football player. But this is Monray, and the reason why they know Monray was because Herod built there. You can see the foundation walls that Herod built there. You can see that it was a holy site for many different cultures. You can even see, if you see in the sort of gray area there in the lower left of the square enclosure, there's a circle, and that circle probably is where. Now, I was asked, what do you think that is? And I said, well, maybe it's a cistern, because it was so round. They said, no, that's where the oak tree was. And so in Genesis chapter 18, when it says that God met Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, you can go there and you can see where the oaks grew today. Now, the oaks obviously aren't there, but Herod built there, and you can see it's clearly a Herodian structure. Constantine also built there. Why? Because this was important to both Judaism and Christianity, because this is where Abraham got the promise. And that culture remembered where the events occurred, and they memorialized it. So Herod built at Mamre. He also built at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, renovating the Second Temple into eventually a temple that many people say exceeded what Solomon had built originally back around 900 in the 900s BC. So 1,000 years later, of course, they've reconstructed the temple because it was destroyed by the Babylonians. And Herod came and built the Temple Mount. This is a representation that a guy named Lee Rittmeyer has done of what Jerusalem looked like at the time of David. And you can see the city of David there that kind of goes up the hill. It's a village of Silwan, Arab village now in Jerusalem. But and down in the lower center, you can see the Pool of Siloam. And they have discovered this processional way that goes all the way up the hill to the Temple Mount. Herod built there at the Temple Mount. Herod also built in Hebron at Machpelah, the cave, over the cave where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried. And of this, I think the certainty of this is no doubt. So when Jesus had this confrontation with the Jewish leaders, and they brought up Abraham, you need to understand that if they walked, they were on the Temple Mount when this occurred. But if they walked 20 miles, 6 or 7 miles to the north to Bethel, they had the place where Abraham built an altar. And if they went south, they had the place where Abraham was buried. And the building that Herod built 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago now, still stands to this day through all the earthquakes that they've had and everything. So I just wanted to clarify that. I don't think I made the point very well that Abraham was such a big deal because there were all of these places. Now, I'm going to make a recommendation. There is a controversy in the body of Christ right now about where the Temple Mount was located. Every time I talk about it, I get emails and messages from people. John, you're stuck on the old Temple Mount, the traditional Temple Mount location. There's a whole nother thing. And I know that. I've watched all those, please understand, I've watched all those videos. I've read all those articles. I've done my own investigation. I've been to both places. I do not accept that the temple was built in the city of David. I'm sorry. I just think good-meaning people are trying to figure it out. I understand that. I just think they make some serious errors. And so I would highly recommend a series that's been done by a group called Associates for Biblical Research. They are in the midst, they've done one part already, Temple Mount Revisionism, a response. The second part of that series, and it's featuring Scott Stripling. Scott is the main person behind the archaeological digs that take place at Shiloh, another site of which I think there is no question that this is the biblical site. This is where the tabernacle stood for almost 400 years. This is where Hannah dedicated her son, said she would, if she had a son, she would dedicate him to the Lord. It is where Samuel heard the voice of God. There is no question in my mind that this is the true biblical site. You can see it, it matches up. So today at 3 o'clock, after you've listened to this, my update, it'll be archived, so you can get it at Associates for Biblical Research YouTube channel. I think it is very well done. It's not, name calling or anything like that. They just say where they think that this alternative view that's developed over the last 20 years or so is wrong. And I pretty much agree with it. Now, listen, I don't agree with everything that Scott Stripling says. Okay, he has a different view of where the biblical city of Ai is, and I don't think that's correct. But, that doesn't make him, it's not a salvation issue. But I think we need to have good, strong, hard-hitting discussions about these particular topics. One of the things that Scott notes in one of the videos, and he did a video about the Temple Mount a few years ago that I thought was pretty good, is that the mythology that's developed in the Islamic world today is that, well, the Jews have nothing to do with the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as we know it. It's just not, it didn't exist. Now you can pull out the 1924 pamphlet that the Waqf did about Jerusalem and show that it says there that this is where Solomon's temple stood. There's no question that this is where Solomon's temple stood. That's a Islamic Arabic publication. I have a reproduction copy of that particular, somebody sent me a reproduction copy of that particular pamphlet. But now, because the Jews are back in the land and Israel's being regathered in unbelief, it's now they have to completely make up a whole new narrative. And this is what Jacob and I talked about. We have this constant propaganda that goes on from many different levels on many different things about building a narrative. To make, what are you going to do? Are you going to believe our narrative, the story that we've made up, or are you going to believe your lying eyes? Are you actually going to believe what you see and hear happening? Or are you going to believe what we tell you? And it's really bad. I see people who have been completely bamboozled by some of these things, and they can't even see it. I'm going to show you an example near the end today. But this is an inscription carved into the rock at a mosque built about the 9th century AD in a town called Nuba, N-U-B-A, between Jerusalem and Hebron. This inscription, well, here's what it says. The limestone block, this is from a Times of Israel article a few years ago. The limestone block into which the Kufic script was carved stands above the mosque mihrab, the niche pointing toward Mecca, and reads, "In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, this territory, Nuba, and all its boundaries and its entire area is an endowment to the rock of Beit el-Maqdis and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as it was dedicated by the commander of the faithful, Umar." Now, listen, that rock of Beit el-Maqdis is the Dome of the Rock. And when you piece together some of the other things, it is clear that this inscription, this is not a writing, okay? This is carved in stone. And it identifies the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. in 900 AD. That's why one of the reasons why I don't accept this new thing, because 1,300 years ago, people were saying this is where the Temple Mount is. It's not like they forgot. And Herod built at a specific place because he wanted to appeal to the Jewish people. And they built that Dome of the Rock, and you've seen that building. That building stands where some of the Hadiths say this is where Solomon's temple stood. It stands on the exact place. That building itself is an abomination to the Lord. Because in that building, and I was able to go in there when we were there in 1995, they still let non-Arab, non-Muslims go in there. I think it's pretty much restricted now, has been for a long time. But and I think I've mentioned this before, along the inside of the Dome of the Rock are portions of the Quran that are inscribed and built into the stone. They are, I think most people would agree, they are the oldest writings of the Quran that exist today. They're on the rock. Like this is on the rock and carved into the rock. These are inscribed in the stones of the building, and one of these panels says God has no son. That's why it's an abomination. So there's coming an abomination of desolation. We know that this is what's prophesied in Scripture, but there's one there right now, today, that says that denies Jesus. That's an abomination. And it's interesting, at the time when Jesus had this conflict in John chapter 8 with the Jewish leaders about Abraham and him saying, before Abraham was, I am, they picked up stones to stone him. And I think I pointed out last week that those stones were probably the stones that were from the altar that Antiochus Epiphanes had desecrated during the time of the Maccabees. Because they had been consecrated to the Lord, they didn't feel that they could just discard them. So what they did was they broke up the altar and they set the stones aside there on the Temple Mount. And the belief was that the Messiah would come and tell us what we can do with those stones. So here we have the Messiah there. And did they ask the Messiah, what do we do with these stones? No, they took it on themselves. They picked up the stones to stone Jesus to get rid of the Messiah. It's a very interesting story. So understand that there are these historical evidences all over the land of Israel. Many of them that point to Abraham, to David, to Solomon, to the tabernacle. There's many places that are more established archaeological than any other places in the world. And now they're finding, they found some kind of human plus something skull in China, I think it was. And it says it's upsetting their notions of evolution. Well, good. I hope they have a lot of sleepless nights before they get rid of that stupid theory of Darwin. May it collapse like the Darwin Arch did in the Galapagos Islands recently. Well, so to put some things in further context that we'll talk about today, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away, for of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And that certainly describes some of the things that I'm going to talk to today. But just a point about foundations. We had the collapse of this condo tower in Miami Beach. This is a tragedy. We hear of these things happening around the world, but now we have it happen in the United States. And I think people in the United States would say, well, that kind of thing doesn't happen here. Well, it did. Now, the cause is unknown. There's going to be, I'm telling you, there's going to be all sorts of theories about this. Last I heard, there were 5 confirmed dead and 159 missing. The pictures of this are just horrific. This happened about 1:30 in the morning, and the tower, it just pancaked down. It just fell. Now, what's coming out is that there's all sorts of reports. Back in 2018, they had engineering reports that came out and said that this might be a problem because the foundations are cracking. And I think this is a perfect, not to diminish the tragedy, the scope of the tragedy there, this is sort of a perfect picture of what happens when the foundations fall apart. And so when you have a country or a church, and speaking of the church in the broad sense, when the foundations are destroyed, it just can't last. I'll talk more about this when we finish up today. So this 12-story tower, part of it just went away. People talk like they heard something happen, and they opened their door, and it was 12 stories down. There was nothing but air, and they were able to get out. And there's some great stories of them carrying out 88-year-old, 89-year-old people that were having trouble navigating the collapsed building. But it doesn't look good. Here's a little video from the Wall Street Journal about this. Part of the problem they have now is that there's fires breaking out. They have to pour water on there, which complicates it, and there's a lot of smoke, which complicates it.
The fire has been going on for a while. It's a very deep fire. It's extremely difficult to locate the source of the fire, and so they've been working around the clock. These fire rescue teams, these brave men and women under the rubble to fix this problem so they can get on, but it is hampering our search efforts. Our top priority now continues to be search and rescue. We continue to have hope. We're continuing to search. We're looking for people alive in the rubble. That is our priority, and our teams have not stopped.
These are a lot of people here, basically looking for family and friends.
The situation behind us is actually getting worse by the day because of the smoke and little fires that are breaking out. They're spraying water on top of it to put out the fire, but that creates even more smoke. As you can see the smoke, it's not a good condition. Even if there are air pockets, it's very concerning to myself and my family.
It's a struggle. We are praying every minute. We are hopeful that she's there, alive, and we're going to see her soon and be able to hold her hand and kiss her. And we love her so much, and we're going to see her soon.
And now they're talking that there might be a number of other buildings. There's a sister building that they're thinking of evacuating. And now all these people are going to be left without a home in the midst of a housing shortage. So there's so many things that you can draw from this. The foundations thing that I mentioned, the suddenness of it happening. I mean, a lot of people were having a party in their condo overlooking the ocean on whatever Wednesday night or Thursday night when this thing collapsed. And their families are gone. I read about a father, mother, and 2 little daughters. Their 2 little daughters are missing. Nobody knows where they are. We pray that they're somewhere, they went away somewhere, but the indications are that this could be a big tragedy. Now, this is from Morgan Stanley. They have issued rules that say that if you're not vaccinated, you can't get into their office, whether you're staff or clients. Now, they're doing it on the honor system. They haven't come out and made any kind of, you have to submit documentation to prove this. But this is growing in different parts around the world. Some sporting events require that you give proof of vaccination. So there's always the concern as to where people are going to draw the line on this vaccination thing. I'm going to play you a clip of the, this is the CEO of MakeAWish. Now, MakeAWish, gives wishes to terminally ill children. If the child is not terminally ill after they screen them, they don't participate in the MakeAWish program. So here is what he said about MakeAWish and its policy.
And CEO of MakeAWish America. And over the past year, we spent each day at MakeAWish preparing for the moment when every possible wish could safely move forward. We've approached this responsibility with a focus and diligence for your family's health and safety. Now, we've consulted with doctors and medical professionals throughout the National Medical Advisory Council, and we've been monitoring public health organizations like the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics. And based on their collective guidance, today we're making a big step forward in delivering hope to you, our Wish kids, and our Wish families. I'm excited to share that MakeAWish will resume granting air travel wishes within the United States and its territories, as well as granting wishes involving large gatherings for vaccinated Wish families as soon as September 15th of 2021. All Wish participants, including your Wish kid and any siblings, will need to be 2 weeks past completion of either a 1-dose or a 2-dose vaccine. While we won't ask for proof of vaccination, we'll ask for any adult participant to sign a letter of understanding that certifies that they and any minors participating in the Wish are vaccinated and understand the risks of traveling at this time.
Okay, that's where it's going. Terminally ill children have to be vaccinated to participate in Make-A-Wish that involves travel or large gatherings, and all their family as well. Or at least they have to have some adults certify that they say that they've received that thing. Now, it's interesting, and when you look at Twitter, usually what Twitter does at the bottom, they have a thing. Well, here's a Twitter post about Derek Chauvin getting sentenced to 22 and a half years. And down there, they always have copy link to tweet. I've never seen a post that does not have that when you click on it to embed it on a website or post it on Facebook. But now, what do they have at the bottom? There's no copy link to the tweet. No copy link to tweet to share it. There's a link to tell you more about certain information. So this is just crazy. There's a female weightlifter from New Zealand who's going to become the first transgender athlete to compete at the Olympics. This male, born male, raised male, competed in weightlifting as a male, is now going to compete as a female at the Olympics in Japan, assuming they're going to take place. There are female weightlifters, at least one that I know of, that have been pushed out of the Olympics because this person is going to participate in her place. This will eventually, any thinking person understands that this is going to destroy women's sports. Someday there will be weightlifting. And look, it's pretty clear that men are stronger than women across the board. There are exceptions to it, but this is I only can describe it, the mythology, the myths that people have created to live by, and fulfilling exactly what 2 Timothy chapter 3 said the world would be like in the end. Yesterday was also the 6th anniversary of the Obergefell same-sex marriage decision. And so when you want to say, or you ask the question, how did we get here? It's pretty easy to figure out. Okay, so here's a trigger warning. I'm going to play a clip of someone who was in a certain office in a certain national capital who made some comments about the Obergefell decision. So if you want to click it off for a minute or so, but understand this, the process of what he described has been going on now for 6 years, and it's easy to see why we are where we are. So here's a clip of you-know-who.
But compared to so many other issues, America's shift has been so quick. I know that Americans of goodwill continue to hold a wide range of views on this issue. Opposition in some cases has been based on sincere and deeply held beliefs. All of us who welcome today's news should be mindful of that fact. Recognize different viewpoints. Revere our deep commitment to religious freedom. But today should also give us hope that on the many issues with which we grapple, often painfully, real change is possible. Shifts in hearts and minds is possible. And those who have come so far on their journey to equality have a responsibility to reach back and help others join them.
Okay, and he went on to say, you know, you just need to re-educate people. Do you feel like the people are trying to re-educate you on a whole bunch of things now? I think so. I feel like it. You put up a post on Facebook and you get a warning that, you know, or you get a thing that, well, you know, here's more information to put in context what you just posted about. And the whole thing is a training process by our overlords to get us to conform to certain things. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Israel. I'm going to come back at the end to some things about critical race theory. So first we'll talk a little bit, you know, we know there was this election. There's a razor-thin majority. 60 to 59 was the vote to form a coalition government in Israel. And the question that a lot of people have is, what does this mean? What's going to happen to Israel? Are they going to be able to stand up against Iran? What are they going to do? What happens if the Hamas starts attacking them again? What's going to happen? I think that what you'll see is that, you know, the question some people ask is, well, will Israel attack Iran? I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, I think, will Israel attack Iran in a very severe physical way directly? Yeah, that's a good question. But it's clear, as you look through the news and everything this week, that Israel faces a real threat from Iran and its proxies, and Israel is attacking Iran right now through its proxies, and doing some things that are pretty incredible on an intelligence level. But here is Naftali Bennett last Sunday at his first cabinet meeting as the Prime Minister of Israel, and some of the comments that he made about Iran. And look, he is a religious Jew, the first to wear a kippah. And so here's what he has to say about the Iranian issue. Because I think he recognizes it as a real threat. Now, the question is, how far will he be able to go?
This weekend, Iran chose a new president, Ibrahim Raisi. Of all the people that Khamenei could have chosen, he chose the hangman of Tehran, the man infamous among Iranians and across the world for leading the death committees, which executed thousands of innocent Iranian citizens throughout the years. Raisi's selection is, I would say, the last chance for the world powers to wake up before returning to the nuclear agreement and to understand who they're doing business with. These guys are murderers, mass murderers. A regime of brutal hangmen must never be allowed to have weapons of mass destruction that will enable it to not to kill thousands but millions. Israel's position will not change on this.
Now, it's interesting that in most of the meeting he spoke in Hebrew, but when he got to this part, he spoke in English because he wanted to send a message to the world that this is where Israel is. So look, this is good that he says this, but then the question is, what does it mean? And the man immediately to your left, Naftali Bennett's right, is Yair Lapid, and he's the foreign minister. He's the prime minister in waiting, but he probably has more control in the coalition than Naftali Bennett does. And Lapid is a man, I think it's fair to say he is a man of the center left. He did issue some statements that, you know, we're going to work with the U.S., we don't want any surprises, we don't want to do anything that they don't know about, which I personally think is a huge mistake because I don't trust the people in charge right now in the State Department and the people who, for example, a special envoy appointed Hadi Amir, who's been appointed to go to the Palestinian envoy, is a very pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel person. And you have anti-Israel people all through the government, just like you have people in the United States that are put in charge of Civil Rights Division that they're racist. I mean, I just don't know how else to say it. They're racist. So in response to this, the opposition leader, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, had this to say about what Lapid was doing. And I think this is a legitimate concern that he's expressing.
Last Thursday, Israel's alternate Prime Minister, Yair Lapid, made an astounding commitment to U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Lapid promised Blinken that Israel would not surprise the United States on matters relating to Iran's nuclear program. That's the program designed to produce nuclear weapons to annihilate the state of Israel. If Prime Minister Begin had followed such a commitment, we would not have destroyed Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor. I myself had been asked by the United States many times to give such a commitment. Now, mind you, there is no greater ally and no greater friend that Israel has like the United States. But when it comes to matters of our security, our very survival, I always reserve the right to act on our own without informing our American friends. There were times that I did tell them of impending actions. There were many other times that I didn't. And yet it took the Lapid-Bennett government 3 days to undermine this important and critical tenet in our national security. And that's why this government is so dangerous to our future. That's also why we'll bring them down a lot faster than you think.
So here is the new president of Iran, or the president-elect. I don't think he's taken office just yet. Raisi, R-A-I-S-I, or Raisi, as some say. When I saw this is his initial news conference the other day in Tehran, my initial reaction was, Amazon made a lot of money getting all those microphones to people. I wish I had the microphone concession for that news conference. It would pay for some trips. And there are some, in places that you might not expect. For example, this is a two-page article, a full two-page article in this morning's Washington Post talking about this guy. Here's what it says. This month, Iran held the most boring and most consequential presidential election in its history. Boring because the election was rigged virtually from the start. Now, this is a newspaper that would support the current administration almost completely without reservation, except on a few op-eds that might make their way in. What made it consequential is not because the winner, Ibrahim Raisi, is a gruesome and unapologetic killer who has spent his entire career inside the regime's coercive institutions, nor is it because Raisi was the first Iranian president to fit that description. Both former President Ali Akbar Rafsanjani and Hassan Rouhani, the current president, were instrumental in building and using the Iranian police state. Unlike Raisi, who has little involvement in foreign affairs, these two supposedly pragmatic clerics, Rouhani and Rafsanjani, advanced operations abroad that killed Americans, Israeli, and Jews around the world. What is instead most striking about Raisi is that he has been groomed for this moment, a moment when the regime teeters on the brink of illegitimacy and needs a brutal enforcer. Raisi isn't a clever, well-read mullah, as were so many of the Islamic Republic's founding fathers, but he is the quintessence of a mature Islamic Republic of Iran. He's all about compulsion, sustaining a creed that ever smaller numbers of Iranians embrace. The mullahs hope that Raisi is ruthless enough to overcome rising resistance to their rule. Even the Financial Times in London had an editorial yesterday, the hardliner poised to take power in Iran. It notes that he used to be, in the early days of the revolution, he went to Qom, that's the Shiite holy city where they have their major Shiite seminary in Iran. I don't think it's the highest ranking cleric in the Shiite world. I think that's that guy that the Pope met with in Iraq a few months ago. But Raisi used to support himself by selling Islamic prayer beads in his teens. And he is now seen by many as the country's next supreme leader. He won a landslide in the election, but it was a low turnout. Now, I think one of the things that the sort of part of the narrative that's been built is that the turnout was historically low since the beginning of the Islamic Revolution. It was probably the lowest turnout for voting. Everybody knows who's going to win. They select the people who they think are going to win. And it was clear months ago that many analysts, and I think even I might have said, that Raisi was clearly going to be the winner. It was just the only question was by how much. Because it appeared that the Iranian people were not going to turn out to vote. In the media, Western media a lot of times, that lack of turnout is portrayed as the Iranians were apathetic. They just didn't care. So they didn't go vote. Victoria Coates, who worked in the Trump administration, is now tied to the Center for Security Policy, has a great article at securefreedom.org. The biggest endorsement that you could get for the Center for Security Policy, I think, is that it's Frank Gaffney's group. Phil Haney, remember Phil, who we still don't know who killed him about a year and a half ago. It seems like the investigation has gone nowhere. By the way, I don't even, in checking, I don't think anybody's even come to claim the body, because his wife had passed away before that. It's, you know, we have all the surveillance stuff for certain events that happened in the nation's capital and everybody, how they got there and the routes that they took, but Phil Haney gets shot in his trailer along the side of the road, and nothing happens about that. That's kind of odd to me. But the biggest recommendation for the Center for Security Policy, I think, is that it was designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has nothing to do with law and is not poverty-oriented anyway. It's a very wealthy organization, called the Center for Security Policy a hate group. So to me, that's an endorsement, because they're wrong on virtually everything that they say. But they have a lot of influence in our government. They had a lot of influence in the first two Obama administrations. They're going to have a lot of influence in the third Obama administration. But Victoria Coates has a good article, Situation Report, a new president is elected in Iran. He has won the presidency with 18 million of the 28 million votes cast, 62% of the vote. Turnout was at a historic low at 48.8%, which suggests that the real total is closer to 25%. The buzzword in the media that voters were apathetic but apathy is canard. Void or no vote came in second to Raisi with 3.7 million votes in the election. So Raisi got 18 million, no vote got 3.7 million among those who showed up to vote. This was not apathy, Victoria notes. This was an organized combination of silent boycott and protest in which more than half the country did not vote at all, while 12.7% of those who did bother to cast a vote rejected all the approved candidates. Raisi is the hand-selected candidate of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, to whom he owes his political career. Given that Khamenei is 83 and rumored to be in poor health, Raisi is already being touted as a potential successor for the Supreme Leader role. Khamenei himself served 2 terms as president as well before becoming Supreme Leader in 1989, so there is a precedent for the president. Certainly the succession must have been at the front of Khamenei's mind when he disqualified all the other serious candidates from running in the election. And he's known as the butcher of Tehran, the hangman of Tehran. Thousands and thousands of people were sent to execution under his direction. He went to Qom. I don't think he's an official mullah or imam, but he was schooled in Islamic theology, went to law school, and became a judge and a lawyer. I don't know that he's a candidate for the leadership. This is a picture of Mojtaba, Mojtaba Khamenei, who is a cleric, an Iranian cleric. He is the second oldest son of Ayatollah Khamenei, and a lot of people think that he will be the next supreme leader when Khomeini, who is, 83 or 89, 83, I think, 84. He's getting up there. And he's not been in good health. There was times last year when they thought he was going to pass away, but he seemed to recover. I think his recovery from near-death situations is rivaling Baby Kim in North Korea. He seems to always, he's dead. We're sure that he's dead, and then he shows up, and the last time he showed up, looks like he's lost a little bit of weight. So, but anyway, when Khomeini goes out, he will be the ruler, and he's only the second ruler that they've had since the Islamic Republic came into existence back in 1979. So since 1989, he's been the head of the dictator, the supreme leader of the Iranian government. And his son, Mojtaba, has worked himself into control of a lot of the financial apparatus that supports the Islamic regime. They parcel things out. They do it because it's very corrupt. It's how they control people. They have money. They control businesses, foundations. So Mojtaba and his father probably control a fortune that rivals that of Bill Gates. It's probably somewhere in the range of $100 billion. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has also set up a lot of front businesses that it uses to fund its operations and control and command structure, and they've centralized over the years, and they control a fortune in the tens of billions of dollars as well to fund these terror operations. So here's a picture of Mojtaba at Qom with other series. The second one from the left there in the front row. He's second from the right in the front row. And this is he with some of the other seminary students there. So the question is, what's going to happen with this election? But with all of this stuff going on, Raisi has said, look, I'm in favor of the JCPOA talks, but we're not going to go back to, I'm not going to go meet with Biden. I don't need to meet with Biden. Biden needs to do what I want. And it's very concerning that the U.S. government seems to be bent on entering back into this JCPOA agreement with the thing on the side that says, well, then we'll use that as a foundation for a stronger and longer agreement. Do you think that's going to happen with these Iranian guys? I mean, come on. And so the only thing that's going to happen is the U.S. is going to capitulate to the demands of the Iranians, which is not good. It's not good for us. It's not good for Israel. But the people in charge, this time it's Anthony Blinken. Before it used to be John Kerry. John Kerry, the man who I think he has a perfect record on being wrong on every foreign policy issue that's ever been presented to him. His rival in that, it would be President Biden, who I had a discussion the other day with someone who thinks Biden is great. And my point was, it's just embarrassing. You know, put the guy back in the basement, because I just think it's cruel to trot him out there all the time for these news conferences and whatnot. Well, in the meantime, while this was going on, there was another mysterious attack. It was supposedly done by a drone it's called a quadcopter or something like that. It has 4 propellers that attacked a atomic organization building in the Tehran area. The attack, by all reports that I've seen, came from within Iran, but of course Israel's being blamed. So when the new head of the Mossad came in early June, he said, listen, Iran can expect more attacks and more assassinations. I think this is probably an Israeli attack, probably headed up by the Mossad. And what the Mossad has done is they have, just as Iran has put their fingers into these groups all over Syria and Lebanon to control them, the Mossad has done the same thing in Iran. I mean, they're not stupid people. So a lot of these attacks, Ahmadinejad, who was axed, the I'm mad about jihad guy that was the president for 8 years, back in the 2000s, he came out and said, well, you know, the head of our secret police is a Mossad agent. Now, Ahmadinejad was always big on conspiracy theories, so take it with a grain of salt. But Israel has been very active in establishing people through all levels of Iranian society that support Israel and will work against the regime. That's always been very well known, and they've developed that. So this attack turns out that it was on, while they said it's an atomic energy organization building, the attack really was on a factory where they manufacture critical components of the centrifuges that they're using to enrich uranium. So here we see attack after attack. We have this building, this thing, this petrochemical plant, this hospital or whatever. You have this fire problem, things are attacked, things blow up. Even some of their nuclear facilities have been attacked in a way that has caused damage, I am told, I've read, in the billions of dollars. It's in the regime. It's to slow them down in their development of nuclear weapons, but they don't stop. They not only are they developing the nuclear weapons, but here's an article from Iran News about, you know, Iran is now a drone power. And this is a photo that was released on May 21st. Now, this drone factory, and I think this particular drone was destroyed in a attack that nobody knows who conducted the attack after this picture was taken. But Israel has been very good about this. This is a website that I look at sometimes, Israel Radar, israelradar.com. They have, I think, some pretty good articles about how the Mossad is conducting operations in this. For example, you'll see they even have an article this week about the Israeli Defense Force was simulating a raid on a Lebanese village in the Golan Heights. So there's this conflict between Israel and Iran. The other thing that's interesting, and we've talked about this before, but this is a perspective paper that came out from the Begin Sadat Center. Iran, Russia, and Turkey are Eurasianist model of foreign relations. Now, it's very interesting the way they describe this alliance between Turkey, Iran, and Russia. And look, these are countries that we watch to see because we think this is how this alliance is going to, eventually these countries are going to form an alliance that's going to attack Israel. The stage is being set for all of that. But look at what some of this article says. Here's the executive summary. Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and think of this, okay, so if Ezekiel 38:39 talks about a Russia-Iran, Turkey-led coalition of Islamic countries that attacks Israel, this is a intelligence report and analysis of the formation of that particular coalition. So I want you to put it into that context. This is what it says. Iran, Turkey, and Russia are building a new model of bilateral ties. Unshackled by formal alliances, the trio is showing it can work together to limit Western influence while avoiding an over-reliance on one another. And I think that squares with the description of this coalition, that it's not a long-standing thing. It's almost a marriage of convenience. This mixture of correlating and contradictory interests, which characterizes the new Eurasianist model of bilateral relations, is a product of a changing global order. While underlying currents on both the regional and global levels are pulling the trio closer together, this does not imply that the parties will attempt to create an official grouping with formal alliance obligations. This is what sets them apart from the West. Iran, Russia, and Turkey see the absence of a formal alliance as a boon. It allows them to maneuver, balance, and honor each other's vital spheres of influence, even though they will have conflicts at times, like Russia and Turkey having conflicts in Libya, which we know is going to be another part of this coalition that comes against Israel in the latter days. This trend of finding common ground without formal obligations is characteristic of the post-unipolar world. So understand where we've gotten to. We used to have a world that had a couple big powers. Now it seems like with what this article I think is describing as the decline of the United States, we're going from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, which allows a coalition like this to form, an alliance like this to form. That seems to be fairly significant because, and this has changed in a very short period of time. So remember the old saying that I used a long time ago in one of my talks. There was a quote from an article from a Hemingway novel. Can't remember the characters. They were talking, and one person says, "Well, how did you go bankrupt?" And the guy says, "Well, I went in two ways. Gradually, then suddenly." And so I think this is sort of how this Bible prophecy thing works too. I'm not saying that Hemingway was a prophet, but the fact is that it does happen gradually. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there it is. We should have been watching for it all along. This is an interesting, the other thing that's going on in Israel right now is there's a very detailed analysis going on of what happened in Gaza over the past a month ago. How did they do? And what does it mean for the future? One of the things, this is a report I saw this morning, how many Gaza Palestinians were killed by Hamas rockets in May? And the answer is about 36% of the total casualties in Gaza were from their own rockets. So this is why Ilhan Omar and AOC are running around. One way of interpreting what they say, which I think is an accurate way because it's the way I view it. That's a joke. But they sort of run around like, well, it's not fair that Israel's not using Iron Dome to shoot down the rockets that are going to fall on the Palestinians in Gaza from Hamas. It's just not fair. It's disproportionate. But this is how, well, they call that thinking, but it doesn't seem to be thinking to me. We also have the situation in Afghanistan. This is from a publication called The Dispatch. The situation in Afghanistan is much worse than you think. The U.S. military is downplaying the Taliban's gains. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said this when he testified in Congress. There's 81 district centers that are currently, we think, are under Taliban control. That's out of 419 district centers. There's no provincial capital that is underneath Taliban control, and there's 34 of those. Milley went on to argue that 60% of the 81 district centers were seized last year, and the others since the last 2 months or so. He went on to say that, which means that the Taliban is making inroads. And this is the General Milley who, go look it up and watch the video of him when he's confronted about the critical race theory and wokeness that's coming into the military. If that's the guy who's defending us, I'm concerned. I have big, big concerns. His response was pathetic, which means that the New York Times and Washington Post and MSNBC loved what Milley had to say when he responded to Republican congressmen, congresspersons asking him questions about critical race theory and that sort of thing. There's also a rise of anti-Semitism. This is also reported by an opinion piece by Victoria Coates and another author in Newsweek magazine. Newsweek has been publishing a lot of conservative articles, but essentially says this, that the BDS movement and the anti-Israel movement is alive and well. And they're changing tactics, they're adapting. I saw a video of how Antifa and BLM are getting around facial recognition software. They're like tattooing their faces and that type of thing to make it difficult for that identification software, artificial intelligence, to identify them. That BDS movement, which is a related organization, I think, to Antifa, is now, what they're doing is they're going to like a port of Seattle and they're getting ships that have Israeli cargo on them turned away from the port. So they're very active in what they're doing, and they're fighting this, and it goes along with the rise in anti-Semitism. This is a Jewish food truck in Philadelphia that was going to show up at a food truck drive-in in Philadelphia. The Antifa, BLM, BDS people complained about it to the point where they didn't ban the truck, they just didn't have the food truck drive-in for anybody because they had a Jewish food truck owned by Jewish people. This is in Philadelphia. You know that Philadelphia is that place that has Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell and the room where they signed the Declaration of Independence. Caroline Glick has a good article about where this is going with the Lapid Bennett government. She's very concerned about it. She says this, Tuesday, Meretz, which is one of the left parties in the coalition, member Knesset Moshe Raz co-sponsored a conference at the Knesset with joint Arab list member of Knesset, Aida Toma Sleiman. The conference ran under the headline, Between Occupation and Apartheid. So these are members of Israel's own Knesset that are talking about how Israel should be split up and divided. Caroline says this, the allegation that Israel is an apartheid state is a deliberate anti-Semitic blood libel. Its purpose is to deny the moral justification for Jewish self-determination by castigating the very concept of Jewish nationhood as a form of racist oppression and Jews as racist oppressors. This all ties in with this whole thing we've been saying about critical race theory. The high watermark for the allegation in its first iteration came in 1975 with the passage of UN General Assembly Resolution 3379, which defined Zionism as a form of racism. The then U.S. Ambassador, former Democrat Senator Daniel Moynihan, gave an extraordinary speech attacking the resolution and so set the stage for its bipartisan rejection and eventual abrogation 15 years later through the efforts of the Bush administration. For 9 years, the concept of Zionism as racism wasted away in the dustbin of history. It was exhumed by members of the Red-Green Alliance in 2000. Since then, it has made a slow but steady comeback, and today it is far more powerful than it was in 1975. And that coalition is headed up by people like that are pushing this: Rashida Tlaib, the Squad, AOC, Presley, Cori Bush, is that her name? Cori what? Well, it's a female. But anyway, they're all doing this attacking Israel thing. The other thing that's going on in Israel is there's this thing coming up for renewal is family reunification. What they've done is they've been able to keep certain intermarried people, Israeli Arabs who marry people from the West Bank, from getting citizenship because they've had problems with it in the past. And this article from Israel Hayom this morning says, reunification law, the stats on terror acts. Members of the second generation of mixed couples, Palestinians and Arab Israelis, are involved in terrorism 3 times more than their relative share of the population. The family reunification procedure, which is extended every year and is now in a political duel, is designed to reduce terrorism. In 1967, about 250,000 Palestinians were naturalized, and veteran demographer Aaron Sofer warns if the law is repealed, they just do away with the restriction. Within 60 years, there will be a Palestinian majority in the state of Israel. And it's been used, it's been abused. There's a person who was naturalized who did the attack in Netanyahus back in March 2002 on the Seder night attack that killed a number of people. Here's a letter from 73 U.S. congresspersons to President Biden, dated this week. This is a PDF of it. You can check the signature pages. And here's some of what they say. We urge you to reverse the previous administration's abandonment of longstanding bipartisan United States policy. We welcome your administration's initial release of development and humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians, as well as inclusion in your fiscal year budget request. In addition, we encourage you to undertake the following steps to align United States policy with your call for supporting our ally Israel and ensuring equal measures of freedom, dignity, security, and prosperity for Israelis and Palestinians. One of those is to formally withdraw the previous administration's peace plan, which paved the way for possible unilateral annexation of territory, and reaffirm as official United States policy the principles affirmed in the conflict referenced by the House of Representatives and House Resolution 326. Quickly fulfill your welcome commitment to reopen a separate U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. Now, this is on a level of foreign policy insanity that we have never seen. The prior administration did correct this problem. They closed this consulate, which is in Jerusalem, near, sort of between the Garden Tomb and the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, where they've had all the unrest about eviction from homes that they haven't paid rent on in 40 years or more, maybe even longer. So now what Blinken has done, he actually announced, here's what he did when he was in Ramallah at the end of May.
The United States will be moving forward with the process to reopen our consulate in Jerusalem. That's an important way for our country to engage with and provide support to the Palestinian people. We're also working in partnership with the United Nations, the international community, Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian people, the government of Israel, to assist in the relief and recovery efforts in Gaza. This relief is urgent. We have to respond to the profound need to help people in this moment.
I sometimes get the impression that he's kind of bored with his job, and I don't think he understands the gravity of what he's doing. But this is just insane that they would open this consulate where we have an embassy, and now they're opening a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem, which is so effectively the United States government is dividing Jerusalem. You understand? They closed this consulate because it was there for a long time. It predated the founding of the nation of Israel in 1948. It was just sort of there as an artifact, and so the Trump administration came in and said, look, we're going to have an embassy here in the capital of Jerusalem. The Congress has passed this law for decades and decades. It was signed by Bill Clinton. I'm going to act on it. We're going to move our embassy. And so they closed this down, and now the Biden administration wants to reopen it. It's insane. First of all, they got to get Israel's approval. It's not like the U.S. land. It's in Israel. It's in the nation's capital of Jerusalem. Victoria Coates and Ted Cruz, she used to work for Ted Cruz, the Center for Security Policy, the little thing. Here's a minute or two from Ted Cruz about this particular situation.
I am hopeful that we will see support for replenishing Israel's Iron Dome munitions. In addition to that, and one of the things I spent a lot of the time talking with Israelis about is the improvements they need in Iron Dome in terms of their capacity, in terms of their radar equipment. I think we should be funding that as well. I've already introduced legislation to do that. I'm worried about that. I mean, look, you saw AOC and Bernie Sanders introducing legislation to block arms sales to Israel. They don't want precision-guided munitions because they want dumb bombs. I mean, Israel bends over backwards to minimize civilian casualties, and the anti-Israel left wants to essentially defund them. I think that is really dangerous. I think we'll see things. All right, one initiative we're already seeing from the Biden administration is moving forward to open a consulate in Jerusalem directed to Palestinians. And I think they've made a strategic decision. As much as they would like to, and I believe they would like to, I think they've decided they can't back away and close our embassy in Jerusalem. So they've decided instead of going that direction, they'll just strengthen the Palestinian claim to sovereignty over Jerusalem. And its intention is the same thing, to undermine Israel's claim
to Jerusalem. You see what they're doing? Ted Cruz is exactly right. It was also came out this week that this was in the Washington Free Beacon that the Biden administration, at least somebody who was interviewed, gave this statement to Washington Free Beacon. This is, one of these unidentified sources, that the State Department was going to back away from the Trump recognition of the Golan Heights as part of sovereign Israel. Now, the State Department knows that they have a political problem if they do this, because there's even some strong support for Israel within the Democratic Party. And they're saying, oh, no, we're not doing this. I will be honest with you. I don't believe them. Trust but verify 100 times if they're saying something. So we talked about that. So here's an article that I want to talk about for just a moment. First of all, this is Kimberly Strassel in the Wall Street Journal on Friday about the demise of H.R. 1. And she does a very good job of going through and pointing out that this H.R. 1, this is the For the People Act about changing the voting, that this would have completely changed the nature of elections in the United States. It got filibustered. It won't be voted on. It's not going to pass right now. So what did they do? So Merrick Garland, who said, I don't want this to be my Justice Department to be a political organization, went out and sued Georgia over the Voting Rights Act, that Georgia and the voter identification and other things that they put in the Georgia law. But he didn't sue any of the other states, like Colorado, that have more restrictions. And he did note that there was actually more avenues for voting in Georgia. It's just that it required voter ID. And you know that Stacey Abrams, whose claim to fame is that I think she's lost almost every election that she's entered recently, who was, I think, Secretary of State of Georgia for a while, and who, by the way, when she lost the race for governor, challenged the election results. I suppose that's okay. Sidebar. This is what lawyers say when they want to discuss something with the judge. You see that on the TV. Your Honor, may I have a sidebar conference? And sometimes they're not any great legal things that are discussed. It's like, when can we break for lunch? One time I had a judge who said, I ate something that wasn't not sitting too well with me and I have to go to the bathroom. Could we take a break? Yeah, I don't want to be the one who say you can't go to the bathroom. But so the sidebar thing is, Rudy Giuliani was suspended from the practice of law this week because of claims and statements he'd made about the things that happened earlier this year. I'm trying to get around the artificial intelligence people from our tech overlords. He's been disbarred, suspended from the practice of law. Even Jonathan Turley, who's no right-winger or supporter of Rudy Giuliani, says this is a horrible thing. I mean, so Giuliani made claims about what happened in November. He's been disbarred for that. But are the people who made claims about what happened in the election in 2016, are they being disbarred? No. He was disbarred, he was suspended without a hearing. This is, the only thing I can say is this is unprecedented. This is a problem. So Kimberly Strassel says, listen, so this is what they want to do. They want to change the Federal Election Commission under this act from a bipartisan 3 Republican, 3 Democrat makeup, which means they have to get a 4-2 vote to do anything, to a 5-person thing that's selected by the current president. And so Merrick Garland has gone out and now he's suing Georgia because their voter law doesn't apply. And by the way, Stacey Abrams, she has been, I mean, there are probably, I would guess, dozens of videos out there on YouTube and elsewhere of her saying voter ID is racist. Guess what? She's gaslighting everybody now. She comes out and says, I've always been in favor of voter ID. The Democrats are now saying, we've always been in favor of voter ID. I don't know what you people are talking about. We never said we were against voter ID. They've been against voter ID for like ever. Now they're saying, well, we were in favor of it. This is what you need to understand is we're in this narrative building thing where people, what are you going to believe? Your lying eyes and ears? That we've actually said that in the past? We never said that. Where it comes up some is, this is a great article. This is an article from Wall Street Journal about 7 ways our world has changed. You might try to get a hold of it. Mass migration to the exurbs remakes America. A new era of big government regions. A faster future for drug development, a fresh brand of success at the mall, an existential crisis for higher education. Colleges and universities are going to have problems because people like being at home and getting their degrees online without having to pay room and board, which is what a lot of colleges use on-site tuition, room and board to fund a lot of their operations. And there's going to be a big financial crisis and shakeout. A couple things I've got to say. Lapid is the head of the foreign ministry in Israel. This is Pride Month, I guess, everywhere. For the first time, the foreign ministry in Israel flew the rainbow flag. There was a Pride parade in Tel Aviv yesterday, over 100,000 people. I don't think this is a good thing. Let me finish up with this. Two things. Support for Israel is now halved among evangelical youth. Why? This was presented at a conference at Tel Aviv University on June 16th. You can find it on their Facebook page at Tel Aviv University. We believe the reason for this drop is connected to the way in which young evangelicals perceive the concept of justice. The young evangelicals think that from a just point of view, or a Christian point of view, they should develop more compassion towards the Palestinians. And so what has now developed is the rate of support for the state of Israel among evangelicals between the ages of 18 and 29 has declined from 2008 to 2021. 3 years, it's declined by more than half, from 69% to 33%, according to a study that was presented at this conference at Tel Aviv University. This is a shocking number. I think it ties in with the rise of anti-Semitism. In the Atlantic a couple months ago, Shadi Hamid wrote an article called America Without God. Now, he's a person on the left. The Atlantic is a left-wing news source. It has some good articles, some thoughtful articles at times. So I do read it on a fairly regular basis. And this article makes some good points. It says, what is America? He's a person of the left, okay? He says, what is America going to look like now that America has abandoned God? What's going to be important? I saw someone interviewed the other day, and what she said was she used to be on the left until she realized that the people on the left didn't care anything about the people they claimed to care about. They were only using them for power and money and to get their political agenda through. She said, what's going to happen, it's very interesting. This is, I think, a secular person. I don't know that she's saved or anything. She was interviewed on Tucker Carlson the other night. I can't even remember her name. But she said, look, what's going to replace this void in people? And this person talks about it, Shadi Hamid, in his article in the Atlantic. What replaces this? Well, people don't give up religion. Everybody has this void that has to be filled with something significant. The lady on Tucker Carlson the other night said it would be filled by economic focus. And that seems to be playing out. And we know that there's a heavy economic component to this beast empire that will come that we should be concerned about. It's very interesting when the secular people pick up on these themes that I'm sure none of these people have studied Bible prophecy, yet they're coming out with these things if you listen to what they're really saying. This article was written by Vivek Ramaswamy. And the question is, can he put wokeism out of business? Now, he's Indian, Hindu. He was a person to the left, but then he realized, he sort of had a wake up and he said, this critical race theory, wokeism that corporations are developing this is a religion. It has a pope. He says this in the article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. The pope is Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. And the cardinals are people like Bill Gates and others with their big foundations, George Soros and others. They're sort of the cardinals at the Vatican that allow this thing to go on. And he says, this is a religion that's been adopted because it doesn't make empirical sense in many respects. You see the protest against critical race theory, don't you? Parents have had it. They had one in Loudoun County, Virginia the other night where the one father was... They invited him in, they put them on a list that they could speak, and then when it came time, after they listened to about 4 dozen of the people, about 20% of the people on the list, they declared the meeting was an unlawful assembly, and if you didn't leave right away, people got arrested. This is what fascists do. It's what fascists are doing in America right in front of us. And how long did that take? Really? few months. It's shocking to me. So Christopher Rufo has written a lot about critical race theory, and this is where this narrative thing comes in. So this guy says it's a religion. Christopher Rufo has done just a phenomenal job at City Journal and on his own website writing about critical race theory and that type of thing. He was on MSNBC the other day with Joy Reid, and it's interesting, the people that understand what Rufo is doing say, man, he destroyed her. And the people at MSNBC, when they put it up, it says, Joy Reid destroys Christopher Rufo. So I'm going to play like a 1.5-minute clip of what happened, and go to the real Christopher Rufo Twitter feed, and he has a thing like, all the things, she gaslighted me about 100 times in this interview. She never let me finish a sentence. She was interrupting me. Well, just watch it. You can make up your own mind. Here's just, I think it's 9 minutes long. I'm only going to play about 1.5 minutes.
Raqqa school board meetings are one result of a national campaign by political operatives to eradicate curriculums on racial and other forms of equity, which, mind you, is not the same thing as critical race theory. One of those operatives, critical race theory opponent, Christopher Rufo, joins me now. And Christopher, thank you so much for making some time to be with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start out and do the elephant in the room. So you and I started off on a little bit of a Twitter beef. I talked about you. I quoted you in an article that one of our great journalists here at NBC had quoted you in a piece, and I quoted that on TV. And then you tweeted that you wanted to come on the show and said, I didn't have the courage to put you on. Now, I will just note that Twitter is a hyperbole zone. So, whatever. It's all water under the bridge. But I just want to get to a couple of little factual things. Why would I need courage to have you on? Are you like an expert in, race or racial history? Are you a lawyer? Are you a legal scholar? Is that part of your background?
Yeah, I'm a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, where I'm running their initiative on critical race theory. And the reason that I reached out on Twitter to you, and I appreciate you having me on, I enjoy this kind of cross-partisan dialogue, but the reason is not just because you were attacking me on air, which I think is fine. It's politics. That's fair game.
1 second, I'm sorry, I wasn't attacking you. I was reading your quote. So that's what I did. I read your quote.
Sure, but you were reading it with the framing, calling me a political operative, which I'm not. I'm actually a think tank scholar. But let's put all that aside. The problem that I have is that you've really spread 4, I think, key false pieces of information about critical race theory. Okay. You've claimed in recent weeks that critical race theory isn't being taught in schools. You've claimed that most American public school students learn what you call Confederate race theory and are taught that slavery was, quote, not so bad. You've claimed that state legislation will prevent schools from teaching about the history of racism. And finally, you've claimed that critical race theory isn't rooted in the philosophical tradition of Marxism. And I think that all 4 of those claims are wrong, and I'd love to discuss them tonight.
Well, she didn't want to discuss them. And she went on, no, and so this is what she's doing. So like Stacey Abrams said, well, I've always been in favor of voter ID, even though, what do you mean I said it before? Do you have that? Yeah, we actually have it on tape, Stacey, we really do. Just like we have those really kind of steamy romance novels that you wrote. Don't even go look it up. You don't want to look it up. Because it's sort of like, you can't unsee it. So this is the narrative that comes up. And she says, well, this guy that wrote the book, How to Become an Anti-Racist, he doesn't even believe in critical race theory, a guy named Kendi. And he does. I mean, here's a quote from Slate magazine a couple weeks ago. Kendi's out going around, I'm not a critical race theorist. I don't know what you're talking about. What critical race theory? What is that? It's only in law schools. Listen, I went to law school, and I learned a little bit about critical race theory, but what I learned about critical theory came in graduate school before I went to law school. It's Marxism. It's tearing down the foundations of everything. Marx said he wanted to destroy God. This is what these people are trying to do. It's a religion, as this guy in the Wall Street Journal says, and we need to stand up against it. But Kendi, 2 weeks ago, said this: I've certainly been inspired by critical race theory and critical race theorists, the way which I formulated definitions of racism and racist and anti-racism. And anti-racists have not only been based on historical sort of evidence, but also Kimberly Crenshaw intersectional theory. And in the interview, Joy Reid goes, you tie intersectional theory into critical race theory. It has nothing to do with it. It's something totally different. And Kendi's, he doesn't even know about critical race theory. Well, this is a quote from Kendi like 2 weeks ago in Slate. By the way, he was interviewed at the Aspen Institute, this guy who wrote the book on being an anti-racist, 2 years ago at the Aspen Institute. What's your definition of racism? You know what he said? I don't know what he said. I listened to what he said. He didn't define racism in any way. He didn't even know what it is. And Joy Reid saying that kids are taught Confederate race theory, that slavery wasn't that bad. Were any of you taught that? This is just, it's unbelievable. So we're in this, you can't believe even what you're seeing. And it's propaganda. I'll close with this. There's a picture from the Temple Institute. When Jews go to the Temple Mount now, by the way, the red heifers that they were hoping to be the candidate for the ashes of the red heifer turned out to have too many blonde hairs, particularly around the eyes. So they were disqualified, but they're still working on it. They came out with a statement the other day. But this is a statement which they came out with the other day. When Jews go to the Temple Mount now, they're restricted in where they can go. And because they consider it a holy place, they go barefoot. Guess what they're finding? Can you zoom in on that hand there, Brian? Around the Temple Mount, pieces of glass where they walk are being placed. Now listen, this is going to be the epicenter of things, and we're seeing this develop. So this is a culture that can't determine, as I said with critical race theory and things, what the truth is anymore. It's what Paul predicted almost 2,000 years ago the world would be like in the end. And this is what we have to deal with. We have to stand strong, stand firm in the faith. What's it say in 1 Corinthians 16? Stand firm in the faith, act like men. But Paul didn't say, act like trans men. He said, act like men. It means something, and we need to follow it. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. We pray that you'll bless us this week. Help us to stand firm in the faith, stand strong, stand up against the devil, put on the armor of God, share the gospel with those around us. Pray you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.